Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This government's big idea to deliver fair work standards is the Scottish Business Pledge, a voluntary scheme that companies sign up to if they are willing to commit to fair work practices. Following the collapse of Carillion, can the First Minister tell Parliament how many of the major outsourcing firms have signed up to the pledge?
First Minister.
The precise information is information that I'm happy to provide in writing to Richard Leonard. I don't have it to hand here. There are a large number of companies that have signed up to the Scottish Business Pledge. It is, of course, a voluntary pledge. We encourage companies to do that. We've had debates in this chamber. I think Patrick Harvey has led some of these calls for the Scottish Business Pledge not to be so voluntary in future, and these are things we keep under review. Of course, the Scottish Business Pledge is just one aspect of our approach to fair work. The Fair Work Convention has taken forward other aspects of that. Indeed, in my regular meeting with the Scottish Trade Unions Congress, the most recent one was last week, we discussed how we raise the profile of fair work generally and have agreed to further work around that. And one of the things I committed to in that meeting was that the Cabinet would have a discussion in this in the near future to look at how we further mainstream this approach to fair work throughout everything we do across government. And again, I hope that's something that will have support right across this chamber.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My question was, how many of these companies have signed up to the Scottish Business Pledge? And the answer is not one. Not one. Not G4S, nor Mighty, not Capita, Interserve, Serco. But that's maybe no surprise when you look at how these companies operate. In Scotland, Carillion had a system where workers on the Shotts rail electrification project were charged up to £100 a week simply to be paid their wages. And we know that construction companies do this across Scotland through a system of umbrella companies set up by employment agencies which allows them to dodge tax, to cut costs and to exploit workers. Does the First Minister think it's acceptable for workers to be charged up to £100 a week simply for being paid their wages?
First Minister.
No, I don't. I think that is absolutely outrageous, and I would condemn any company pursuing any practice of that nature. I would also take the opportunity today, and I hope again I would be echoed in this by voices across the chamber, to encourage the kinds of companies that Richard Leonard has cited here to sign up to the Scottish Business Pledge and to take action around their own practices that enable them to sign up to the Scottish Business Pledge. But I think perhaps the most important and pertinent point I can make to Richard Leonard is this one. Many of the practices he cites that him and I are in agreement about in terms of how unacceptable and outrageous they are, of course, are matters relating to employment law. Employment law remains reserved to Westminster. So I would put the issue back to Richard Leonard because, of course, the Scottish Labour Party have long opposed employment law being devolved to this Parliament. So if the Scottish Labour Party wants to enable this government to take tougher action on practices like that, will he join me today now in calling for employment law to be devolved to this Parliament in order that we can do exactly that?
Richard Leonard.
It's not about employment law. This is about This is about public procurement. Your government is handing over millions of pounds of public money to these companies, and they are treating workers shamefully. And here's what this means in the real world. Labour will release today redacted payslips from workers on the flagship Aberdeen peripheral route. These payslips will show that workers are being charged for the privilege of being paid. So on a contract funded by your government, workers have been blatantly exploited. With the collapse of Carillion, what is your government doing to ensure that no worker will be charged to simply receive their wages?
First Minister.
Let let me make a number of points, hopefully to try to be helpful. Firstly, we will look at any information that Richard Leonard wants to make available. Secondly, this government has gone further than I think any other government in the UK in terms of embedding fair approaches to things like the living wage, 0 hours contracts, blacklisting into the public procurement process, and we will continue to look at how we can take further action to do that. But in terms of companies and how they operate and the legal context in which they operate, very often, I'm sorry to say to Richard Leonard, it is a matter of employment law. And if he wants to join us in asking for this to be devolved, then I would welcome that. But, you know, there's another issue here. Because with employment law, it's about arguing for additional powers to be devolved. But it can't have escaped Richard Leonard's notice that one of the powers in the context of the Brexit withdrawal bill that the UK government wants to effectively reserve is power over public procurement, which would restrict this government even further. So it's not enough for Richard Leonard simply to come to this chamber and raise problems. He's also got to join with us in equipping this government with the solutions to these problems. And when he starts to do that, perhaps he will be taken a bit more seriously.